सर्वास्त्वा महाज्वाला मानवी वैरुट्या अक्षुप्ता मानसी महामानसी षोडश विद्या देव्यो रक्षन्तु वो नित्यं स्वाहा. Om.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome. My name is Bianca Collins. I'm the Curator of Public Programs for the Fowler Museum at UCLA. I'm very pleased to present today's program as part of our Lunch and Learn series, which offers easily digestible explorations of charismatic objects from around the world. Today, we are joined by Joanna Barkman, who is zooming in from halfway across the world in Australia for this program exploring embroidered Jain temple and shrine hangings that offer insights into the religious beliefs and imagery of the Jain faith. Associated with the Svetambara sect, also known as the white-clad sect of Jainism, these textiles once formed backdrops to stone sculptures of gods, the 24 Jina or victors in Jain temples. The works featured in this talk are from the Ronald and Maxine Linde collection, part of a promised gift to UCLA, where it will find its future home with the Fowler Museum. Before we get going, a little bit of background about Joanna Barkman, the Fowler's Senior Curator of Southeast Asian and Pacific Art. Joanna has published research on double-ikat silk patola and mordant-block-printed cotton textiles imitating patola. They were produced and traded between Gujarat, India, and Indonesia in 17th to 19th centuries. Barkman's work explores the influence of these Indian trade textiles on the design repertoire and ceremonial practices of the Atoin meto people in West Timor, Indonesia. Once we get going with this program and the screen sharing begins, I encourage you to click View Options and then select Side-by-Side mode to ensure Joanna's video feed doesn't cover any of her presentation. If you have any questions during this program, please submit them through the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen to be considered to be answered at the end of the program. Okay, that's enough from me. Over to you, Joanna.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good morning here in Australia. I'm very pleased to be able to give this presentation today. And just before I pop up my, share my screen with you, there's a couple of people I'd like to thank. I'd like to firstly acknowledge Dr. Marla Burns, the director of the Fowler Museum at UCLA. I'd like to extend a warm welcome and hello to Ron and Maxine Linde, who have very kindly allowed me to do this presentation, including some of their beautiful and magnificent Jain textiles. I'd like to acknowledge and thank Professor John E. Court and also the Santa Barbara Art Museum for permissions to use images. Thanks also to Leela Kelly, Garcia Armenian, and special greetings to my Jain family in Santa Monica, Susan, Sanjeev, Chaitan, and Olivia. My presentation today is in 3 parts, and I'll just move over now and bring up the screen. Is that visible, Bianca?
I am not yet seeing a shared screen, just your video feed.
Okay, just one moment. Let's see.
All right, we're in business.
Lovely. So my presentation is entitled Jain Temple Hangings, and it's in 3 parts. I'm going to begin by giving a very brief overview to Jainism and Jain art. I'd like to talk about an embroidery technique that's used to create these magnificent temple hangings. And finally, we'll look at 3 specific hangings from the Linde's collection. Jainism is a living faith in India. It's thought to have originated in Bihar in northeastern India. And since its inception, it's been practiced in areas such as Uttar Pradesh, Delhi, Punjab, Haryana, Madhya Pradesh, Kashmir, and Rajasthan. In Western India, royal patronage in Gujarat afforded Jain officials to really develop and cultivate magnificent heritage in the region of Gujarat in the form of Jain temples. And also Gujarat is renowned for having several important pilgrimage sites for Jain practitioners. In the south of the continent, Jainism is followed in Karnataka, in Madras and Kerala. Jainism honours 24 Tirthankaras, who are also known as Jina, all of whom are believed to have been born in North India. The word Jina means victor or conqueror, and the 24 Jina are all considered to have been human beings who obtained liberation, known as moksha. So they're liberated from the samsara of worldly life, the cycle of life and death. The 24th Jina, Victor Mahavira, was born in 599 prior to the current era. So this indicates that the religion is well over 2,500 years old. Mahavira lived simultaneously with Gautama Buddha and was the most widely revered of the 24 Jina. The three jewels of Jainism relate to right knowledge, right faith, and right conduct. And there are the basic teachings or dharma, the vows undertaken by devout Jains include non-violence, which extends to all living beings, and hence vegetarianism is very closely aligned with Jainism, truthfulness, non-stealing, sexual self-restraint, and non-attachment to possessions. There are two primary sects in Jainism, the Svetambara sect, often known as the white-clad sect, and the Digambara sect, often known as the, as the naked-clad sect. There's an error there. It's not the sky-clad, it's the, sky-clad stroke naked-clad sect. The symbolism, also there's a lovely motto that is associated with Jainism that states that the function of souls are to help one another. So there's a very basic overview in terms of the faith. Jain art, Jainism has contributed to the magnificent heritage of Indian art through the construction of sastra bhandaras, libraries for sacred manuscripts, and also temples for worship. In addition to these more monumental forms of architecture and heritage, Jain art has produced magnificent sculptures, often referred to as icons, carved from stone and cast in bronze, many decorated with precious stones. Votive stones have also been carved and created since the 2nd century. They're known as ayagapata. Also, illustrated manuscripts, as I mentioned, are a major art form that contribute to the documentation of the Jain scriptures. Also, paintings known as pata, created on paper and cloth, depict sites and journeys of pilgrimage, and also tantric and mystical formulas related to the religion. Art, though, was not necessarily made by Jain people. Jains commissioned art from artisans who had the skills and ability to create these various art forms, and they created them according to a specific Jain aesthetic. It's interesting to note that Jains do not worship a creator god. They meditate on the nature of the Jina who has attained the ideals of enlightenment and final liberation. Therefore, we can say that Jains are encouraged to practice a psychic form of worship, not a form of worship of idols or physical objects. And this is important insofar as it suggests that the icons in and of themselves are not imbued with sacred nature. They're revered, they're honoured, they're respected, and they're cared for greatly. But in and of themselves, they're not considered to contain the sacred essence of a god. In fact, they're created to convey specific attributes such as serenity, peacefulness, contentment, in order that the devotee meditates upon these characteristics in order to purify their own soul, in order to also improve their capacity to also demonstrate these attributes. This image here shows a devotee performing puja the offering of incense. Other sorts of objects are offered, such as fruits and food, sandalwood and water. And what's interesting in this image is that the behind the icon, we can see an embroidered temple hanging known as a choda, and this served as a backdrop to the icons in the Jain temples. Choda is one form of embroidered textile that are used by Jains. In addition to the choda wall hanging, there's also canopies that are sometimes produced that are hung above the head of the icon to prevent dust or debris falling on it. Also, illustrated manuscripts are often encased in beautifully embroidered manuscript covers. And the final form of textile that's used by Jains is a type of cover for a broom handle. And it's believed, or it's stated actually, that these handles would be embroidered, sometimes with the 8 auspicious symbols of Jainism, and placed on the handle of the broom, which is the monk or the nuns in their possession, to sweep the ground in advance of them walking. And this is done so as a monk or a nun does not take or inadvertently kill living beings such as insects. So these beautiful embroidered broom handles are also part of the textiles used by Jain people. What these textiles largely have in common, technique known as Zardosi, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about the Zardosi technique at this point. So the technique of Zardosi is one of the oldest forms of ornate embroidery that is used in Indian textiles. Zardosi, we know it's mentioned in the Vedic literature. It's also mentioned in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata classics. It's applied to garments, soft furnishings, canopies, shoes, parasols, and of course, wall hangings. Zardosi uses metallic threads made from very fine wires that are wound into tubular shapes. So you can see on the left, it's got more of a spring thread if you want, or it's more like a coil. And then the other one is a tighter or more a finer piece of what's known as zari. So the technique is Zardosi. The thread is called zari. However, it's hollow. And this is cut into little segments, and then with a needle and thread, it's able to be stitched onto a ground cloth. Traditionally, gold bullion and silver was used to create these zari threads, thus associating this technique with royalty and aristocrats. However, in the 20th century, it's more common that they're made from a form of copper wire and then polished with accordingly to create the colours or the impression of silver and gold. The needles there are known as an ari needle, and the ari needles are actually used to when doing overlay or couching work, where a technique whereby a yarn is laid, or a braid of gold is laid onto a ground cloth, and then it's punctured and stitched and attached to the cloth by puncturing up and down through the cloth. And we'll have a look at a moment to see an example of how the ari thread is actually used on a frame. The cloth is stretched on a frame known as an ada, and then the ari implement is used to puncture the cloth. The ground cloth is often velvet or satin, a heavy satin or silk, and it needs to be a heavy cloth to be able to sustain the weight of these threads in this puncturing process. So Zardosi reached its heights during the Mughal period in India, and around 850, this technique declined in use. However, it's had a real resurgence toward the end of the 20th century, and it's now being widely produced in centres such as Lucknow, Surat, Varanasi, Delhi, and in Jaipur. And the Zardosi technique has become very associated with wedding attire and couture garments. Just to show a little more, we can see on the stem stitch here, we can see how the zari thread, the coil has been, the tube has been cut into a small piece, and then a needle is run through it to actually stitch it. So using stitches such as stem stitch, the twisted stem stitch, padding stitch, other stitches, we see here on this technique using a chain stitch that's then infilled with using the pieces of zari thread and then being infilled. So we see lots of different basic embroidery stitches are applied to this technique. In addition to that, there's couching that's used, which I mentioned, which is where a yarn or a zari is placed on top of the cloth, and then it's stitched down using a series of smaller stitches. Another popular technique is this one, which is known as infilling over here. And we can see where the outline has been created, like in the little daisy we saw before, and then using a satin stitch and using the infilling of the design as achieved. So at this point, it would be great to jump over and have a look at a very short video that actually talks to this technique. It's also known as kalabatu. It's referred to in some parts of India as well. And we're going to just look to show how this technique is applied in the here and now. And also you'll see that there's the incorporation not only of the threads, but also of different beads and sequins and other accoutrements. So here I'm going to, we'll go to the video. So at this point, I'd like to look at the first of our three choda that I'd like to discuss in a little more detail. This is an absolutely glorious textile or temple hanging. And there's so much to talk about here. But we'll begin, first of all, I'm really fascinated by the use of this trifoil cusped arch, which references aspects of Jain architecture that's very common in the temple. And again, this alludes to the placement, and this would be hanging behind the icon. And again, the icon would be framed, and there's an illusion of this framing by the incorporation of this cusped archway. We can see up here at the top, we can see these celestial beings that are actually carrying garlands of the mandara flower, which is a sacred flower in Jainism, and they're carrying these to the higher realms. We also see the four abodes here, 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 and here of the celestial, the four celestial abodes of the gods, indicated by this very classic stylized form of Jain temple with the flag that's often flown at the peak of the temple. This is a very interesting, the central image is a mandala, or a yantra, which I'll talk about in a little more detail in the next hanging that we look at. But in particular with this one, I wanted to consider this very top row of 8 icons, which are referred to as the 8 auspicious symbols, or the Asta Mangala in Jainism. If we look at these symbols, we can see that the first one made here is the swastik, and this symbolizes prosperity and is all things good. It represents in Jainism the 4 destinies of the worldly soul and the states of being. So it's possible in Jainism to be born into the heavenly realm or as a heavenly being, to be born as a hell being. The 3rd is to be born as an animal or a plant. And the 4th is to be a human being. And so inherent in the swastika are these 4 possibilities of worldly states. It's also said that the swastik represents the Sangha, the 4 aspects of the Jain Sangha, which relates to the male monks who are sadhu, the female nuns, sadhivs, and the lay males and the lay females. And often the swastik is actually created using uncooked rice grains and is laid out as part of puja, in the temple. The other emblem that's depicted, the second auspicious symbol, is known as the Srivastha. And this is a diamond-shaped mark, often is depicted on the chest of the Jina. And if we look back at this image, we can see here the Srivastha is incorporated into these icons of the Jinas. The 3rd and 4th auspicious emblems include the prosperity pot, which if you look closely in the next large temple hanging, we see this represented in relation to the larger yantra, with the eyes being incorporated. The 4th emblem is the throne, and the throne and the umbrella are actually associated with royalty in India, but also depicted often with divine beings representing their divine authority and omnipresence. And so the throne, also in Jain imagery, the depiction of the Jinas is only ever of them in standing meditation or in seated meditation. And often we see the depiction of the Jina seated on a throne. Sometimes just the throne itself is depicted, because in fact, it's believed that the Jina do not actually exist in physical form, that they are now part of the higher realms. The elaborate symbol of the Ninefold Prosperity is a variation of the swastik. It's a more comprehensive design, also representing joy and prosperity. And it has 9 branches, which is said to represent the 9 treasures of the universal monarch. So having obtained liberation, there are 9 different treasures, some of which include a huge army of elephants and a huge army of war chariots. So these are all accoutrements that come with this auspicious status. The water jug, the use of holy water, is of course contributed in puja in the temple. And then the 7th and 8th include the mirror, which is thought to does reflect light and is a metaphor for reflecting the light of Jainism and the pair of fish. Second choda that I'd like to look at is equally impressive, embroidered using a Zardosi technique on dense velvet background. Choda, we know, was created 1968 to 69, and we know that because in the inscription at the base of this choda, it gives information about the occasion it was commissioned and the year. And in the Vikrami calendar, which is 57 years ahead of the Gregorian calendar, this sort of inscription enables us to give some sort of indication of the time in which it was created. In relation to this choda, I'd like to talk about this central emblem here. It's a mystical diagram known as a yantra in Jainism, and this particular one is referred to as the Nava Devata, or sometimes also referred to as the Siddha chakra. And it's based on the 8 petals of the lotus flower. So you can see the 8 petals. And then the 9th point is considered to be the center. This too, this yantra also represents prosperity, and it's believed to destroy karma. So it's a very common yantra in Jainism. And looking at it, how well, actually, the 5 Jina that are represented here represent the Jain pantheon. And we have here the enlightened being. This Jina represents the enlightened being. At the top, we have a Siddha, which represents all other enlightened souls. To the right, we have the monastic leader. To the left, we have the monastic instructor. And at the very bottom, we have the Jina that represents the community of monks and nuns, the ascetics. We know this particular cloth relates to the Svetambara sect, insofar as these 4 other petals here, they incorporate the 3 jewels, which I mentioned earlier: right knowledge, right faith, and right conduct, as well as a 4th jewel, which is inscribed as right austerity. And indeed, the Digambara sect have a slightly different set of iconography that appears in the Siddha chakra. So hence we're able to differentiate this as belonging to the Svetambara sect. The other aspect of this beautiful temple hanging is the 2 figures we see at the base, the man and the woman. And actually we know from the inscription below on the cloth that this tells the story of Mayasundari. Mayasundari was a young Jain woman who refused to follow instruction of her father and marry. And she wanted to marry the man of her father's choice. She wanted to wait until she Dharma, as she was taught in the Jain religion, or Karma, offered her the opportunity to marry the man that was presented to her. And finally, her father thought, well, I'll trick her, and he married his daughter to a leper. And having married the leper, Mayasundari took her husband, Shripal, to the temple, and they were blessed by the Jain monk. And there, his leprosy was cured, and they lived thereafter. And this story apparently is a very popular and widely known story in terms of Jainism and in Indian culture. The other aspect of this textile that's worth noting is that we see along the side here, we see the 14 auspicious dreams of the queen, the mother of the 24th Jina. And if we just move to the next slide, I wanted to just illustrate these. So it's believed that Queen Trisala, on the eve of conception of the 24th Jina Mahavira, she had these premonitions. And these are the dreams that are associated thus with Mahavira's birth. So the white elephant, we have the white bull, we have a lion, we have Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, we have the garland of the mandara flowers again, we have a full moon with a deer, we have the sun, we have a beautiful, we have a flag, we also have the vase with water, a lake with lotuses, we have the ocean of milky water, and also over here we have the heavenly abode. And at the very base we have a set of jewels, and on the other side a smokeless, over here we have a smokeless fire. These 14 images, which we also see on this banner here, these 14 dreams, vary slightly again between the Svetambara and the Digambara sect. So again, these textiles relate to the Svetambara sect. The Digambara sect actually have 16 auspicious dreams. So this is the final textile I'd like to have a look at. absolutely magnificent. And again, we see this trifoil cusped archway. We see the inclusion of 3 umbrellas, a sign of divine authority. And as I mentioned, we've got the 14 auspicious streams of the Mahavira and his conception. Interestingly, though, I'd like to focus at this central yantra, or mandal, if you wish, which is very auspicious insofar as it represents the middle world being the world, it's part of Jain geography, which consists of 2.5 continents. And this is the world into which human beings are born into. And it is only in this realm that we can obtain enlightenment. We share the world with animals. And interestingly, if we look at this diagram here, so the 2.5 worlds are represented. So this is one world here. This is another world here. These are the oceans that surround us. And we can see over here on the this detail, the fish and the wildlife, the sea life swimming through the oceans. So the 2 continents, and then this is the other half, which represents a series of terraces. And these terraces are believed to exist in the higher realm. And indeed, on the 4th terrace, it is the place where the Jinas are believed to be born and bathed. At the very peak, or at the terrace that relates at the very center, is Mount Meru, which is believed to cosmologically be the highest point of all points in the Jain faith. So that is a really magnificent work that talks something through this imagery. We begin to understand these concepts that relate to Jain religion. I just wanted to end by making the point that, as I said before, Jains are encouraged to commission, be it temples or artworks or choda, such as these, and we know so through the beautiful inscriptions that are attached to them. And they're encouraged to commission artworks at least once during their lifetime, according to their means, because this is believed to earn them merit and to assist the devotee to cross the ocean of worldly life. And this quote, which is really wonderful, states that the man who commissions a Jain temple, installs a Jina image, worships a Jina image, and supports the Jain teachings, earns the fruits of the joys of a human life, a life as a god and liberation. It is said, as many atoms as there are for wood and other materials in the temple, for that many years he will enjoy life in a heavenly realm. So these very rare and sumptuous embroidered textile hangings provide us with fascinating insights into the living religion of Jainism, its concepts, values, and practices. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna. That was so interesting. And we've got lots of questions coming in. I know that we are technically at our 30-minute mark. So if anyone needs to head out, that's cool. But we're going to spend some time answering some of these questions. The first question I would like to pose to you is, someone's curious to know if these textiles will be featured anytime soon for people to see in person in an exhibition at the Fowler.
We're really excited at the Fowler to be working toward developing a Fowler in Focus exhibition that we're hoping will incorporate some of these beautiful choda textiles, as well as some beautiful canopy and some other examples of Jain textiles. So fortunately, the Fowler Museum at UCLA has recently received support from the Linde Foundation to look into, to develop exhibitions and public programming, looking at living religions, particularly in relation to Southern California. So this will be a really great opportunity for the Fowler to collaborate more extensively with the Jain community of Southern California. And we really look forward to that opportunity and bringing that knowledge and expertise and members of the community to be involved, not only in coming and viewing and enjoying these magnificent objects, but also helping us to actually think through how to develop this exhibition and what's the best way in terms of undertaking how to research the material and how to present it. So we're very excited about that prospect, and we hope that Fowler in Focus will be presented in the next in the next couple of years.
Yes, awesome. I can't wait for that. So Margaret is asking about the gold and silver in these embroidered textiles. Is the gold and silver that we're seeing, is it mostly thread, or is some of the gold and silver background coming through because of beading?
So beads are used, and also in the chota that I've shown you from the Linde collection, you'll notice there are sequins. So sequins have become very popular as well. Traditionally, yeah, beading has become very popular with the technique, and I think you probably saw some of that on the video. However, most of the temple hangings, certainly the ones I've presented today, they use both the tubular zari thread, which is sewn with a cotton thread through the middle to attach it down. They use types of braid that are then couched onto the surface, and then predominantly they're using sequins. So they're the braid, the zari threads, the coiled thread, the cotton thread that's used to thread it, and then the sequins are the main materials on the backing of velvet. And then also many of these have a satin and cotton backing again to cover the underside of the velveteen.
Yeah, and is the background color significant? Someone noted, Mary says that she noticed it always seems to be the same dark color.
That's an interesting question. They tend to be a navy blue or red. So they're the two colors. I actually don't know the answer of that question. I expect it would have something to do also with the availability of velvet and the colors that velvet, have been produced in the 60s and thereabouts. It's interesting, there are some examples of chota which have been created on satin, and in those examples that I've seen, they have used green satin. So I think it's an interesting question deserving of more research, but certainly in terms of the published examples of chota, they tend to either be a maroon red background or a very deep blue background.
Thank you. And someone's curious to know, Victor is wondering about the artisans that are producing these works, and if they're compensated well. Are they able to establish status as part of the middle class as a result of this work? Do you know?
As far as I understand, so Zardos, which is the name attributed to people who do the Zardosi embroidery, actually the video that I showed, the part of that also relates to a training program that a gentleman had undertaken and then has gone on to create this business and now employs 19 or so people who are creating the textiles for the garments that are being produced. So I do think that it has, and as this technique has become very popular again, particularly around the production of wedding attire and designer garments, this is very much a market that it's obviously appealing to a very middle and upper class market. So I would expect that people are being remunerated for this skill and technique. Zardos have, both women, men and children have performed Zardosi embroidery. We know from as early as the 12th century and possibly before that time that there have actually been small communities of people that perform this skill, and obviously it's been transmitted intergenerationally since that time. But now, of course, as I said, one can go and train at a college or undertake a course of education and vocational training. So that's really interesting to see these skills and these crafts becoming accreditised in learning institutes in India.
Okay, well, I think this should be the last question. I don't want to go too far over our 30 minutes. There's plenty more, and I'll send you the Q&A report so you can give it a review and answer if your schedule allows. But someone is wondering, Claire asks if you can recommend any books that cover Jainism and art and culture.
Yeah, there's actually some great books. There's a book that was published in 2016 by the Svetambara Art Museum called Puja and Piety. So that's actually a catalogue with several interesting essays that look at the three main Indian religions, Hindu, Jainism and Buddhism. So there's in there and a range of objects in the catalogue relating to Jainism, and that chapter is written by John E. Court. There is the Jain Victors is a very good book, and also The Victorious Ones that has been published by the Rubin Art Museum in New York. So actually, I'm happy to send some references through and can compile a short list of those references. And there's also a very interesting resource online which relates to Jainopedia. So it's really interesting in terms of terminology, and there's been a lot of work, I think, going to documenting Jainism as it's begun to become more popular around the world. For many years, Jainism it remained in India. Monks were not able, not able to travel far across water. And so it's not been a religion that spread in the way that Buddhism has done so. Yet in the 20th century, with migration of Indian people to other parts of the world, we now see Jainism and Jain temples being created in many, many parts of the world, and centers of learning and worship and study. So it's interesting to see these other ways of presenting the religion and documenting the religion being undertaken by devotees.
Right. Well, we can definitely communicate those recommendations in the wrap-up email we send with the link to the recorded program, and maybe we'll share it on social too. So don't worry, everyone, we'll get that information to you. Thank you so much, Joanna, for offering such an exciting sneak peek of these gorgeous textiles and teaching us so much about the intricate process of creation and the deeply layered symbolism within. Really appreciate you waking up early to educate us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who joined us. This program has been recorded and will be available on our Instagram and on the Fowler's website for you to revisit and share as you see fit. And we hope that you will join us again for our next program, the details for which can be found on the closing slide. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.